As we head into the Thanksgiving holiday, we want to thank you for listening. We are grateful for your support. This week on the podcast, My Russia, What I Saw Inside the Kremlin. The author Jill Dougherty spent 30 years with CNN. Her reporting included the presidencies of Boris Yeltsin and Mikhail Gorbachev, and almost 10 years as Moscow bureau chief as Vladimir Putin came to power. In her memoir, she talks about the evolution of modern Russia from her unique perspective. She spoke with Alex Marquardt, formerly a foreign affairs reporter for CNN and ABC News, in August about the evolution of modern Russia from her unique perspective.
Giving Tuesday is coming, a global day to support the causes that matter most. I'm Paul from C-SPAN, and if open access to your government matters to you, you don't have to wait. Make your Giving Tuesday gift to C-SPAN today. We bring you live, unfiltered coverage of Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court, so you can access your government without spin or commentary. C-SPAN is nonprofit, commercial-free, and receives no government funding. We're powered by listeners like you. Make your Giving Tuesday gift now at cspan.org/donate. And thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government.
This really is such an honor, and I was so flattered to be asked by Jill to do this. I've been such a huge fan of Jill's for a long time. When I got sent out to Moscow in 2009 by ABC News, a number of people recommended that I reach out to Jill because clearly there was no one who knew the lay of the land better than her. And then fast forward to 2022, with the invasion of Ukraine, each of us on different sides of that. Jill was in Moscow, I was in southern Ukraine, and in the years that followed, we spent a lot of time on the air together. I as a correspondent, she as an expert. Sometimes I'd be an anchor and I'd be getting to ask her questions as a guest, and every time it was just this moment of, I am not worthy of sharing the screen with Jill. And I already had this immense respect for her, and that only deepened in reading this book. Truly, it is just an extraordinary read about her life, about her time in Russia, her thoughts about where the country was and where the country is going. And so I want to start with the genesis of this story, Jill, and how you got there. This is, from the get-go, a deeply personal book about you, about your sister, about your family, about falling in love with Russian culture and interest in the Soviet Union. There are, of course, a lot of books about Putin, about Russia, but what made you want to write this book, and what did you feel needed to be told?
Oh, when I was a kid, when I was in high school, and the book talks about this, I studied the Russian language and got hooked on it. And I do not know why. I mean, why do we fall in love with the people we fall in love with? Why do we like cities that we like to go to? There was something about the language that intrigued me. It's complicated. It looks different because it has a different alphabet. And the idea, I'm growing up in the old Soviet Union, the idea that this is the enemy, the communist dictatorship in the Soviet Union, and kind of, that it was, I think, emotional attraction, but kind of revulsion or fear at the same time. And then later, when I decided that I would actually write something, it seemed that everybody else had written a book. I think everybody else that I know has been in your store, Brad, and giving talks about their books. And I thought, eventually I should write a book. And I talked with a friend of mine, and I said, I'm thinking about writing a book about Russia. And I said, it's probably going to be like Putin and, Putin and Russia. And he said, Jill, there are plenty of good books about Putin. We don't need another Putin book. But what is different about you, and I guess it really is that I am just an average American who at an early age got interested in that country and the language, and then pursued it, sometimes indirectly, but it's the thing that really I am excited about. It always has been. And so I decided that what I would do is, write about the Russia that I know. And luckily, as Alex knows, I did go back to Russia on a regular basis until the invasion in February 2022. Most Americans do not even go back, sadly, anymore, because we can't. But I was going back on a regular basis. And so I began, as Brad mentioned, I began with the invasion, but then I go back to my childhood, high school, and the Cold War. So there's a lot of, Cold War history. That's where a lot of the research and the things that I experienced, I went through those and tried to bring them out. And then also the personal side, there were things like, I have to say, there's a section in there on vodka. And I know people are, you start laughing. I knew you would laugh when I said that. But vodka actually was a very important part of my life, at one part of my life. And especially in Russia, it is no longer, thank God. But I thought, these are the things that I have to put in there as well. Let's say the cultural implications of vodka. So anyway.
I did chuckle when I turned the page and saw the chapter called Vodka. The very first story that I managed to sell to the evening news on ABC was about Russian drinking. But expand on that. Why was that such an important topic to highlight, the drinking culture? Because it's not all about alcoholism. You describe these wonderful scenes around the table with many of the friends you made over the years.
Yes, that really is, I think, important because, you could say vodka, Russians drink a lot of vodka, et cetera. But what intrigued me was when I was an exchange student, I drank a lot of vodka. And I drank a lot of vodka with Russian friends. And so I realized that drinking vodka in Russia is a lot more than drinking vodka. There's a whole ritual. And in a way, I found it almost like I'm going to say, spiritual experience. And I do mean that there is an intimacy that comes from drinking vodka in Russia with friends. There are rituals that people have. We were just talking with a woman the other night who's Russian, who reminded me that usually there's a tradition of having 3 people share a bottle of vodka, and one person has to be the kind of expert in divvying it up in the proper, third. But that again, it wasn't just vodka. It was the meaning of vodka, the cultural meaning, and also the language. There are a lot of words for drinking vodka in Russian.
And you noted that you can never leave a bottle half empty. No one's going to put that back on the shelf. It has to be finished.
Well, yes. In fact, my friend, one of my oldest friends, I still know him after 50 years. He's in St. Petersburg. When we would drink together, he would take the bottle of vodka, and I'll do it with the microphone. He would turn it upside down, like that, and then we'd go. And he would squeeze out the last drop. So.
And you also noticed that there was a culture shift in dealing with government officials when Putin came to power, because he does drink less than certainly his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin.
That is definitely true. In fact, poor Boris, he was an alcoholic, as we all know. But when Putin, under Yeltsin, I would go to meetings, and within 2 seconds, and people who know Russia are laughing over there, can you see you smiling? You'd go to a meeting, and they would start with cognac at 8 o'clock in the morning. So that was the Yeltsin years. Then Putin comes in. Putin basically doesn't really drink. He does a bit, but he is not a drinker, as far as we know. And when he came in, I would go to the very same meetings, and they would say, "Would you like some tea? Would you like some coffee?" And invariably, some young woman would come and bring it. So it was a cultural shift. And I think his sportsman-like physique probably defined some of that.
If you're ever having a slow or down day, just go on YouTube and look up the video of Boris Yeltsin and Bill Clinton after what I think was a very boozy lunch. And Yeltsin is speaking, and Clinton just cannot keep it together. He's cracking up. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen between two world leaders. But backing up, Jill, in terms of when you fell in love with Russian and sort of Soviet culture, there is something that is thoroughly intoxicating about the culture, about the history, about the language that grabs people like you. There's a real romanticism. What do you think that is? Well, what is it that about that place that sort of sinks its hooks into people?
Well, it either sinks its hooks into you or revolts you, or is, you are filled with revulsion. I think it is a very strong culture. And people either love it or hate it. And I have known people who really, truly hate it. And right now, I have to, get into Ukraine a bit. Right now, there are a lot of people who hate Russia because of what is going on in Ukraine. And so I don't want to come off as, there are people who love Russia and the culture. And I do love the culture. I don't know why particularly. I'm just attracted to it. But I also am, I think, enough of a realist. And I've seen life in the Soviet Union where there's a lot of really bad stuff that happens. And in this book, the one thing that I kept going back to as I wrote it was the fact that the Russian people often end up paying the biggest price for what Russia does. Right now, you could say, yes, Russians to a certain extent support the war and all of that. You can look at polls. But essentially, Putin is damaging Russia, and damaging Russia in a very serious way that is going to last for years and years. And so I'm not trying to be romantic about this at all. But I will say that it is a culture that deeply attracts me. And, Russia is a big place, too. It has a lot of different cultures within it. And certainly the Soviet Union was even bigger.
And that's one of the early points you also make in the book is when people ask you your nationality, it's not the same as, everyone here I think would say American, and there it's much more sort of ethnic groups and where they're originally from. Let's talk about Putin. This is someone who, as a leader, you've been tracking and watching in a very detailed way for almost 30 years. Interestingly, you write that your paths didn't quite cross, but when you first went to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, you were staying near where he was living when he was a teenager. When you studied at Leningrad State University, he was across the campus, I believe, at the law school. What were your first impressions of him when he did come to power? And talk a little bit about the evolution in the past almost 3 decades.
Well, he was actually at Leningrad State University. So my twin sister and I, and she's in the book liberally, we were in a dormitory at Leningrad State University. As far as I know, no Americans met, maybe Rich can tell me, but no, as far as I know, no Americans met Putin at that point. And you wouldn't expect it because a lot of Russians would not consort with Americans. I mean, it would be very dangerous. It would be bad for your career. So I'm not surprised. But later, when I saw him for the first time, I can remember it vividly. It was the election in March when he had, remember, Yeltsin steps down at the end of the year, New Year's, and then he says, I'm leaving, and I have a person who is going to take over, and this is Mr. Putin. And he introduces him, and then they had to have an election. So they held the election very quickly in March of 2000. So when I decided that I had to go to Russia to cover that election, which I did. So I remember Putin coming in, and I'd covered Yeltsin for a long time. Boris Yeltsin is or was enormous. He's like a football player. He's like a fullback or whatever, I guess fullback. And so here comes Putin. Putin is not much bigger than I am. Really, truly. I don't know, maybe 5'6", 5'7" at the most, it feels. He's not big. And he walked in with that kind of, they call it the gunslinger's walk, kind of an athletic, but he kind of holds one hand down like that. They say it's from the KGB, so you can get your gun out. But whatever. He walked in. He was not in a suit. He was in a beautiful sweater, actually, kind of a dark sweater. He looked young. He looked athletic. And he was very open to questions. I asked him a question that very first night. And so his evolution, I mean, we can talk about this all night. But I would say, I came to the conclusion in the book that the best way I can describe him is he is a Soviet man. A lot of people grew up and lived in the Soviet Union. And a lot of people came out of it and became normal people. No, I mean, really, that sounds funny, but they did not particularly like it in the Soviet Union, and they grew up and kind of did not want to go back to those days. I think Vladimir Putin, not to be psychology 101 about him, but I do think that there's a yearning that he has for the days when things were more organized and controlled. Because, when he came in, there was worry, legitimate worry. Would the Soviet Union fall apart? There was a lot of, after Yeltsin, it was, for some people, pleasant chaos because you could, read what you wanted and everything was open. But it was also kind of a chaotic period. So Putin comes in and says, no more of this. We're going to straighten this out. And he continues to be that type of person. I think that he actually has now more, let's say, mania for history and his role in history. I think he wants to rebuild something. And I'm not going to say the Soviet Union, but I would say more Russia, like almost imperial Russia, is the closest I can get to it. And that, unfortunately, I don't think is what's needed for modern Russia, and especially for young people in Russia.
After the invasion of Ukraine, you wrote, quote, "I didn't listen to him as closely as I should have." What did you mean by that?
Well, he was, everything he said, I had to read, and I included them in my CNN reports. But there were things that he said, and I can remember the first time he went on air was after Boris Yeltsin stepped down, and Putin had his own kind of New Year's address. So Boris says, goodbye, I wish I could have done better. And then Putin comes in and he says, we believe in freedom of the media. We believe in, svoboda slova. We believe in human rights. We believe in all these great things. And then he kind of leaned in and he said, and if anyone thinks that they are going to take advantage of this interim period, they've got another thing coming. It was like, whoa. And when I saw that first, I thought, oh, note that. Freedom of press, freedom, human rights, all of the good things that I, as a Westerner, thought were important. And I kind of ignored that, don't you dare think about it, I'm in charge, etc. I kind of just, it didn't penetrate. And that's what happened, I would say, with me for a number of years. I would concentrate on the things that I thought were signs that he was reformer, westernizer, etc. And I would somewhat ignore, or maybe I was too obtuse to see it, I do not know. But he was saying a lot of the stuff he said at that point, if you go back and you look at it, he was saying things that he followed through on. And I just had perhaps wishful thinking. I no longer have wishful thinking, and I listen to everything he says, and I try to analyze what he says up to this day, because he often says exactly what he thinks.
As someone who has studied him so closely, we have seen in the past few months, as Trump has tried to end this war in Ukraine, he has consistently expressed, including just a few days ago, surprise and disappointment by the things that Putin is doing, continuing to bomb Kyiv and cities all across Ukraine. Do you believe that Trump and his team actually understand who they're up against?
No, I don't. I think they're coming at it from a very different viewpoint. I think, President Trump, I can't jump into his head, but it seems to me, obviously, he talks about business. I think he really feels that if you sit down, well, number one, he thinks if he sits down with the other person, that the personal relationship will define what's going to happen. That's number one. Number two would be, he thinks that you can ultimately get everybody to do a deal, Well, look, Putin has done a lot of deals. Putin is a very rich man, but there are other things that guide Putin. Putin is not only money. He's got enough money. He's got, he's like one of the richest people in the world. But he has history, and he talks about history all the time. And I remember an interview that Tucker Carlson did with Putin. And when Putin started saying, well, 500 years ago, and Tucker Carlson was his eyes were glazing over. And I thought, they shouldn't be, because that is important to Putin. He really is hooked on history. And so his view, which is to me warped and wrong, that Ukraine isn't really a country, that it doesn't really have a language, that it's actually Russia and it's ours. He just said that the other day. He corrected the Belarusian president. The Belarusian president said, hey, you're taking a lot of territory in Ukraine. And he said, we're taking back what's ours. So that's the way he looks at it. And
he essentially laid that out in an essay, if I'm not mistaken, the summer before the invasion. I mean, it's an incredible read.
Yeah.
We, of course, want to focus on the book, but because this is such a pivotal week, I just want your thoughts. We have the Russia envoy, Steve Witkoff, probably heading to Moscow. His counterpart, Keith Kellogg, who handles Ukraine, likely heading to Kyiv as well. The threat of sanctions is on the table. Do you think the Trump administration finally acts and does something? Do you think that Putin caves, or is this charade going to keep going on?
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
Well, I would start from the last question. Does Putin cave? I don't think Putin's going to cave. But Putin can be unpredictable. He can suddenly, pull a little rabbit out of a hat and do something that you don't expect. So I always leave like 10% of my brain thinking, what could he do that I didn't see coming? And so I think it's entirely possible that Putin, knowing that this is a really important week, that he might do something unexpected. But I don't know what that would be. In the meantime, I think this, ultimatum to Putin is not working. You can see it. I mean, Putin has not really mentioned Trump by name, but he said, that there were inflated expectations. That's what happens. Remember, Trump said, I'm very disappointed in Mr. Putin. And Putin said, disappointment comes from expecting things. And, so he's saying, Donald, you thought a little bit too much that I would do what you want. Don't forget, these guys, and you know this, Alex, from being in Moscow, these are two leaders who want to look strong. Putin wants to look strong, and so does Trump. And so now, with Trump saying, I'm disappointed, I'm giving you a deadline, 50 days. No, 2 weeks, and now it's Friday. And so to have the American president dictating to the Russian president is pretty galling to a lot of people in Russia. And you can see it in the media and other pushback, like by the former President Medvedev just the other day, a classic example of why you should not troll back idiotic trollers. Don't answer them. I tell that to myself when I'm ready to answer somebody online. I think, don't do it, because you're never going to win, and they're probably crazy anyway. But Trump did, and look where we are.
In just a few moments, we want to open it up for questions, so get your questions ready, but I have a couple more before we do that. You write not just about your extraordinary journalism career, but your relationship with Russian journalists, friends over time, and the state of Russian journalism today. And this is a quote. You write, Russian journalism no longer exists in Russia. What is the state of Russian journalism?
It's really, I would say, really bad. I mean, Putin, one of the first things that Putin actually did when he came into office was to go after the media. And it was relentless, but it was not like, the gendarmes at the gate with guns, although that actually did happen, and I was there when it happened with one broadcaster. However, a lot of it was this kind of quasi-fake legal stuff. They're, mishandling funds or whatever. But he went after the media very soon after he got into office. And now all of the Russian media are controlled by the government. And the people who aren't, the people who were not, the TV Rain, for those of you who know Russia, TV Rain, Echo Moscow, many other outfits left after the full-scale invasion, and they are now in Europe. So they are outside of Russia, but they broadcast, a lot of them went on to YouTube. YouTube is kind of like TV for Russia right now. So they broadcast back. There are some others that do, like online media. But the question for them is, can they really have an influence in Russia? Because they're not there. This is like a lot of, I was saying, I wish I were able to go back because I want to see it. I don't think I'll be happy with what I see, but I want to go back. I do not feel that I can. But those people cannot go back. They would be arrested. They're declared foreign agents. They are hounded out of existence. So it's a very difficult situation. I would add, though, it's interesting because there are some journalists, nameless journalists, who are extremely brave, who continue to work in Russia, and they contribute to the publications that are outside of the country. But they do it at really risk of their lives. And they will never have a byline, and they might be arrested. But they do exist, and that's how a lot of information gets out right now.
So for years, even after leaving CNN, you maintained a visa to go back on a moment's notice, which you had to do a couple times. And of course, you were there at the beginning of the war. March 5th was 2022 was your last day in Moscow, and you said that it was your last day, perhaps forever. And you just mentioned that you don't know if you'll be able to go back. Where does that uncertainty come from? Is it a security question? And obviously, you would like to go back if you could.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, look at the Americans who've been taken by the Russian government and held as hostages, And so I think any American who goes, there is a possibility that they could be held as hostages and exchange. It's not that they love to collect Americans like Matryoshka dolls. It's that they want to trade them for the people that Putin wants. So, I think they would gladly take anyone here, to trade for somebody that Putin wants. But I still feel, you can't get it unless you're there. And I get it. I get it as much as I can get it. And I go online and I listen to people, I watch broadcasts, I speak with people who talk with their families. That's very helpful. Russians who talk with their families. But being there, walking on the streets, talking with people, watching TV, going to stores, seeing what's for sale and how much does it cost. That's all. That's it. As somebody said, I think I have this quote in the book. He said, you've got to, smell the blood, and that's kind of what it is. He was talking about war, but I think you really need to do that.
Yeah, we can't overstate how sensitive and how difficult it is to be a journalist, not just Russian, of course, which is the most difficult, but a foreign journalist. Our colleague Fred Pleitkin has just gotten back to Moscow. He has to be so careful about what he says on the air. Jill and others on the air with him have to be very careful about what they say in terms of calling it a war and talking about the invasion and if you're in Moscow. On that note, we'd love to open it up for questions. I'm sure that many of you do have questions. Please, if you would, line up at this microphone over here, and Jill will take them one at a time.
So I'm very interested in Russia. My grandparents came from the Pale of Settlement. Is something wrong?
No,
That's okay.
Please.
And I've always loved Russian literature and music, which you haven't mentioned. I'm kind of surprised. Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. Trump has ended them. Were they important? Will they be missed? Does it matter?
Oh, good questions. Well, I worked for VOA for about 5 or 6 years. And yes, I think they will be missed. Both of them, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, RFE-RL, and Voice of America, in my opinion, have a very important role. I see some people in the back with VOA, RFE-RL, et cetera. These are the people who tell Russians not only about America, but they tell Russians about Russia. And right now, the Russians are not getting information about their own country. And I do not consider it propaganda. It should not be propaganda. I mean, I will get on my high horse and say one thing, that if the idea is to shut down VOA or RFERL and turn it into a propaganda organ for the United States, it will be a massive mistake. The most effective things, and I was a guide on the old US Information Agency exhibits that went throughout the Soviet Union. The most effective thing was to say, yes, we have racial problems. I mean, going back years, I would answer this question and say, yes, we do, but we try to fix it. We try to improve the country. Because nobody is going to believe that the United States doesn't have problems right now, So if you start saying everything's hunky-dory, they're just going to laugh. It's ludicrous. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, sir. I'll take this man, and then Toby, I have a friend here who really knows Russia but cannot stand up. So maybe we can... Oh, yeah, I could give you my mic. Anyway, yes, sir.
Thank you for your talk. I want to get your response to what could be interpreted as the failure of American foreign policy in the making of Putin and modern Russia. Now, Gorbachev floated two terms, perestroika and glasnost. Glasnost meaning openness, perestroika meaning restructuring. After he was deposed and Yeltsin took over, the economy collapsed, and America and intellectuals like Jeffrey Sachs tried to push market reform on it, which led to impoverishment and women going to prostitution. I mean, couldn't the Americans could have been less gloating and saying, okay, yeah, we have destroyed Russia. Let's be a little more, like a mini Marshall Plan or something.
Well,
and then
yes.
I just want to ask one more thing about
Yes,
the Ukraine.
quickly, because we really have a lot of people.
Just a question about Ukraine. We have the Monroe Doctrine, which says we don't tolerate interference in South America. Can you fault Putin for McCain and everyone going right up to Ukraine and demanding that they...
Yes, thank you very much. On the Monroe Doctrine, it was a very long time ago, and I think that Mr. Putin should respect the fact that the countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union are independent countries. And it's as simple as that. I know he wants kind of this, belt around Russia to protect it, and he feels that NATO is going to attack, et cetera, which he knows is not going to happen, by the way. But he does not, in my book, he does not have the right to dictate to other countries what they do. And now, we went through that period. That is true. And I think, that we could have that debate. But we don't have a Monroe Doctrine anymore. So I just don't think that in the modern world you can go around and tell countries what to do.
Thank you. It's called knee surgery. I'm sorry, I can't get up. Jill, your experience just brings back the desire to sit around a table with a bottle of vodka for so many of us. And there's a large group of people who have that experience. And the reason they have that experience is because of people-to-people contact, not because you met Putin 100 times, but because you met Russians thousands of times. So my question to you is, how much of the failure of U.S. policy involves people, i.e. Witkoff, no experience, useful idiot, no interpreter, no understanding of what it really means when a Russian says, in principle, I agree with you, which means you're full of shit. Russians, the team has 100 years of experience. Ushakov, Lavrov, people in the foreign ministry, all these people. Yeah. So can we succeed if we don't know Russia the way some of us do? And my second question is, did any U.S. president ever understand Russia?
Ooh. Well, I mean, I think the Bill and Boris show was pretty good. Bill Clinton and Boris, they seem to get along. I don't know whether they understood, but, Bill Clinton actually had traveled to Russia when he was in college, and maybe he understood a bit. And he had a person, Strobe Talbot, who really understood Russia. So, let's not forget that. But yeah, I think, you're making a really good point about, let's say, having exchanges. Right now, academic exchanges are being cut back. And my life was changed by being on an academic exchange. And I know people here, one of my closest, friends, my partner, was an exchange student. It changes your life. So when I think in a very, let's say, practical, hands-on way, not knowing Russia is very dangerous, because you will have a person who says things, think of it, and what they're saying has, let's say, significance because of their background, and you don't get it. Kind of like, again, that Putin interview where he's talking about history, and his interlocutor is saying, history? What's that got to do with anything? So this is the problem. I think right now, unfortunately, we do not have people close to the president who understand Russia, as far as I can tell. There probably are some still left in the State Department. My friends who have been in the State Department can tell me, but I do not see anybody who truly understands Russia, Ukraine, or that entire, I hate to say, former Soviet space, whatever it is. I don't think they get it. Yeah.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you for hosting and giving us the chance. For those of us who have followed your dispatches, this is a lot of fun. You spoke a bit about the evolution of different Russian leaders that you've interacted with. You spoke a bit about the evolution of Russian journalism. Could you speak just a bit about the evolution of Russians' relationship with journalism and with the media over the course of your career, and how you've seen it change, and maybe where you see it going?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think, if I go back to my first introduction to journalism, it was in the Soviet Union. And it was, Pravda and Izvestia. And the old joke, Pravda is truth, and Izvestia is news. And they used to say, there's no truth in the news, and there's no news in the truth. So that was my introduction to journalism in the Soviet Union. But, at the end of Gorbachev with Glasnost, which the other gentleman mentioned, people were able, suddenly stuff that was, forbidden for years and years, people were able to read their own literature and to find out about their own history. And that was, I think, crucially important. So then you had a flowering of journalism, and it was really a very interesting period. Now, at that point, people were also paying for articles. There was kind of that yellow journalism, a politician could pay for articles. But I think it really was a flowering of journalism. But Putin, again, believes his idea, and he's literally said this, the guy who pays for it calls the tune. So he thinks that, an outlet, any outlet, media outlet, whoever pays for it gets to tell them what to say. And in the United States, there are outlets that do that. But for the most part, America doesn't have that you separate editorial and the owner from the actual news. And so, but Putin doesn't believe that. So right now, I think that's why you have this complete control of the media. I mean, it's just, some of the people I see on TV today are people whom I considered normal a few years ago, and they've drunk the Kool-Aid. It's really incredible. I have to ask, these are Russians, do they believe what they're saying? Or is it just that it's easier to go with the flow and, your career will continue and you still have the paycheck? I think some of it might be that, because they can't believe this. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. It's been great. I want to ask about the interim period, that is several years after 2000, as Putin has ascended power, and was expressing some interest in closer relations with the West. So the question really is, to what extent was Putin sincere about that? And kind of maybe more importantly, and this is a question I think we ask in the West frequently, Were there missed opportunities that time, sort of misunderstanding between the two sides? Or was Putin's view of East-West relations actually fixed at that point, and that we didn't miss any opportunities, that it was just sort of
That's a
playing
great
around?
question. That's a great question. There's a lot of debate about this right now, and I don't think anybody has the final answer, but I'll tell you what I think. Okay. I said Putin was a Soviet man, right? And I believe he was a KGB agent. So he came from that world which had almost no trust in the West. West was the enemy, trying to undermine Russia and the Soviet Union before it. So that's the world that he came from. Now, when he got into power, and this is just my personal feeling, I do think he thought this might be a period where we could work together on a few things. I mean, you think like 9/11, it is true that he allowed American bases, he allowed the transit of American military supplies into Afghanistan, even going against some of the people who were in his administration. There were times where I think he thought he might be able to do something. And that is the time that I personally would say there is some culpability in the West. And I'll give you an example of why. I was on a plane domestically in the United States with a congressman at that time, kind of end of the Soviet Union. And there were some laws that, I won't get into them, but like sanctions. And the United States was thinking about getting rid of these sanctions. And this congressman, and I said, well, wouldn't that be a good idea? One concerned Soviet Jews getting out, okay, Jackson-Vanik Amendment. And I said, well, that finally, Jews can now get out of the Soviet Union, and it's Russia, not the Soviet Union. Maybe it's a good time that we can kind of ease up on that. And the congressman said to me, no, we shouldn't. We need to have a stick to hold over them. And I was really shocked. So there was some of that in the United States, a triumphalism at the end of the Soviet Union, which I think Russians, being very proud and also suspicious, said, you know what? That's what we expected they would do. And so this is kind of coming up. This is not to condone what Putin is doing, but that's about the best that I can ask. Right now, I think he has cut the cord. I think he has given up on the West, and I think he is intent on continuing the war as much as I can. Thank you very much. Good question. Yes, sir.
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
Is there anyone currently or in history that Putin genuinely admires, respects, number one? And number two, what do you think he really thinks of Trump, who kind of an absurd figure with his fake tan and his gold embellishments? I mean, what do you think Putin thinks of him? But more importantly to me, is there someone he really admires?
Oh, he admires Peter the Great. Yes, no, truly. I think it's going back, I have a picture of his old office. He had a picture of Peter the Great at that time. This is going back. I think he wants to be Peter the Great. I think he thinks of himself as Peter the Great. And I'm sure Brad, you probably have some books on Peter the Great. People can read up on what Putin's going to do next. But seriously, it is a well-known fact. What does he think of Trump? I think he understands Trump pretty well. The KGB, the FSB now, as the CIA, does psychological profiles of leaders, so he knows a lot of the peculiarities of the president. And I think, if you look at Witkoff's maybe third last visit, when he brought back that portrait of Donald Trump and said that Mr. Putin was a really nice guy, that's classic Putin. It's Putin, Putin was an FSB, a KGB agent whose job it was to recruit people. And the way you recruit people is you say, Alex, you're really a great guy, and you kind of play up to the person. And if Alex were really a terrible guy, then Putin would be a terrible guy back. I mean, it's fascinating to watch. He is what you want him to be. So I think he has Trump's number. I really do, and I'm not trying to be funny about that. I think he understands Trump. And the only thing right now is the unpredictability of Trump has gotten so unpredictable that I'm not quite sure they know what end is up. So by Friday, it will be very interesting. But I think they've probably worked it out, that they've got multiple approaches that can be used. Yes, Batu.
Hi,
Good to
Jill.
see you.
Thank you. Great talk. So I have a question. In your book, actually, you describe the whole trajectory of the Putin system and evolution of Russia. So in your mind, what we are dealing right now, it's a Putin's Russia or Russia's Putin?
Putin's Russia. Putin's Russia or Russia's Putin? Well, there is Putin's Russia right now. And thank you. Batu is one of my favorite diplomats, former ambassador from Georgia to the United States, among many other jobs. But thank you. So Putin's Russia exists right now because Putin is shaping Russia, dictating laws, arresting people, in some cases having them killed, etc., and dictating pretty much what's going on. Now, Russia's Putin, to a certain extent, yeah, I think, again, the Soviet Union kind of formed him. The sad thing to me is what, and again, this is my personal opinion, is what is being lost right now. I teach a course at Georgetown. I was
going to say.
Yeah, I call it the Putin generation. So this is, my students, we look at the younger generation in Russia, young Russians, who are they, what do they think, et cetera. And when I started teaching that, like 5 or 6 years ago, I was much more optimistic. They were studying foreign languages, they were traveling, they were open to minorities, like gays and all sorts, even ethnic minorities, et cetera. And I really did have an idea that maybe this could be different, maybe this generation could be different. But what's happening now is I think Putin is stealing the future of these young Russian people. And that's not an exaggeration. I think he is narrowing their future, just closing in, saying, we don't need the rest of the world. We're special. Everybody hates us. Russophobia, all of this stuff. Instead of opening, it's closing. And I think the victims are going to be the young people who will not be able to come to the United States and, like Toby was saying, won't be on an exchange program, won't be going to Europe, won't be, able to access information the way they should be. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Hello.
If some of the people you're seeing are people who are on TV, like Evelyn Farkas.
I know, and I get to ask you guys questions. I have to mention I'm with the McCain Institute because someone mentioned John McCain. I also am mindful that I'm sandwiched between 2 Georgians, including Ambassador Kutelia, who was a McCain Institute fellow. Thank you so much, Jill, for writing this book. Thank you, Alex, for joining her on stage here at Politics and Prose, our neighborhood bookstore. We know that you are an awesome, outstanding analyst on Russia and on U.S.-Russia relations. So this question might be a little unfair, and she's going to pull you back to Europe, but China. It's in your index, and I know, tragically, you were there for a short time in Hong Kong. But speaking of vodka, if you give a Russian officer, military officer, enough vodka and ask them about China, they might reveal how they really feel and how they view China. So can you talk to us about what you understand from speaking to Russian officials and other Russians about the perspective vis-a-vis China?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big worry, and it's no surprise, is will Russia become the, younger brother to China? I mean, the Russian economy is nothing compared to China. But they use each other. They kind of need each other. Russia needs, at this point, sophisticated electronics for its war effort. It needs some weapons. And it also, I think, the relationship is sometimes described as, friendly relations, et cetera. They're they're working together. But I think what unites them the most is undermining the West. I really think, get everything else aside, that they can, it's kind of like a tag team. China can work on the United States and its influence in Asia, et cetera. Russia can work in the European space on undermining. And I think it's a sad combination. And you might, of course, add Iran, to that. The three of them are best buddies. Oh, and I forgot North Korea. How could I forget North Korea? But I think that's one of the things. But right now, China needs Russian energy, and Russia needs the high-tech, sophisticated stuff that China can give it. That's the best I can do. Yeah. Iya.
Yes. Hi, thank you so much, Jill,
Sure.
for writing the book. I'm very much looking forward to the next one. I think it's going to be very, very exciting. Putin is an old guy, so we talk about him as if he's something constant, even though he's been a constant in our contemporary lives. 5 U.S. presidents, imagine that. Since Bill Clinton, he's been in power. Sometimes people forget that. So he's had all this time to, shape, mold, whatever he wanted to with his society. So it's a tough question to ask. But do you have any thoughts about where Russia could go after Putin? Because he's an old guy. He's going to be gone in 10, 15 years.
He's younger than I am.
Hopefully sooner.
No, well, technically. Anyway, okay. So yes, he will eventually die, I think. But okay. So what comes next? Putin is a smart guy. So I am presuming that he has gamed some of this out. Now, there's a lot. I think the fascinating part of Russia right now is this next generation. So all of these guys who are like 70, upper 60s, 70s, and a little bit more, have kids. And the kids are like 40, 50, and they are now, in charge of companies, or they're in the government, et cetera. So that's an interesting, dynamic to watch, who could be next. But I don't think that Putinism will die with Putin. I don't think it's going to be over when he's over. I think that he will engineer it as much as he can to have something, that Putinism continues. However, when you're dead, you're dead. And I think the immediate, of course, the news will break. Okay, so we should figure out, we're doing a live shot, right? And we're going to say, oh, Jill, what comes next? So what comes next is technically the prime minister takes over. And the prime minister takes over for 3 months, I think, something like that. And then they have to have an election. Okay, that's the easy part. The hard part is what will be going on back in the Kremlin as people take out their knives and stab each other and start fighting. I'm not saying literally, although you never know. But I think it'll be a knockdown, drag-out fight of people who have a lot of power and a lot of money. And all of a sudden the system, the guy who held it together is gone. So we could be in for a very chaotic period, I think, after Putin is gone. But what comes next, I don't know. I really don't. I think it's a country that a lot of Russia hands say it's stable, predictable, until it isn't. And then there's suddenly a big switch. So that could be what happens. But I think it's going to be a rough ride initially. Yeah. Thank you.
Are we ready for it?
I don't know who's ready for it, but we're going to have to be.
And he could technically be in office until 2036.
He could, yeah. He can continue until he's, 83, I think, technically. And, of course, he's changed the Constitution and the laws so much that, let's say he's a vigorous 83. He might say, we need leadership. I think I'll stay in power. But anyway, it's fascinating. I think there's one more person. Do we have enough time?
We have 5 more minutes.
5 minutes. Okay.
Hi.
All right.
So you've been talking a lot about being able to understand Russia and how that's very important for just navigating geopolitics and whatnot. But I was wondering what you think about what do you think separates you as somebody who's studied Russia and then from the outside and then kind of going on the inside and being there and then understanding Russia, what do you think separates you from somebody who's maybe been in that culture since, or somebody who is Russian and born in Russia? What do you think separates your perspective from some of that innate cultural?
That's a really good question. I thought you were going to ask it a little differently, but no, I mean, look, I spent a lot of time. I've spent 50 years of my life devoted to either the language or being there, as a student, traveling, working, etc. So I lived in a dorm that didn't have a lot of hot water, and I've been in a lot of weird places in Russia. And I say that with all the love in my heart. But I think it's given me some sort of understanding of the reality of people's lives. For instance, when the Soviet Union fell apart, everyone in the West, myself included, said, yay, communism is dead, it's over. And a lot of people who are, Soviet citizens said, my factory just shut down. My kids don't have they can't go to Crimea anymore on vacation. There were a lot of bad things that happened to people on a basic level. So I think I can understand that, and I have some emotional understanding of what they went through. But I could, and I think I say this in the book, I could leave. It's always been very painful for me to say that, because I have friends who are still there. And in the old Soviet days, they couldn't leave. They were stuck. And I could fly away and come back and have everything in America. And I could vote and I could read whatever I wanted. And they were stuck. Now, they're not really stuck anymore. I mean, you can still get out. But they have a visceral understanding of, obviously, their society, but also what it means to live in a truly repressive place. And I am talking to my friends now, my Russian friends, and trying to understand some of the feelings that I have about my own life right now. And I think they have a pretty good understanding of what I'm going through right now. Thank you for the question. This will have to be the last one.
Could you say something about the future population growth of Russia? Are people getting married and having children?
Wow. Well, they were, but right now the population, there's almost no population growth. Obviously, with the war, a lot of people decided not to have kids. And then you have enormous casualties in the war. So there's just a lot of social dislocation of people. A lot of people who are serving are from poor regions, but they are, they're dying. You have seen some of the numbers, probably 1 million casualties, which includes dead and wounded, but still huge numbers. So I think that's going to be a real problem. Putin talks about this all the time. He has, in fact, he wants every woman to have, 15 children? No, 8 children, I think was the latest I saw. He's encouraging women to have 8 children. And by the way, you can now get a traditional values visa. In case you believe in big families, you can move to Russia and they'll let you in with a new visa. I'm not making this up. Think about it. You never know. I saw it on RT. They're saying the West is coming to Russia. So that was my laugh for the day. But in any case, yeah, it's a serious situation.
And that's all the time we have. But a big, big thanks to Jill Dougherty. It is a terrific, terrific book. Personal, fascinating, covers all kinds of issues over the years. So can't recommend it enough. Jill, thank you so much for the talk. Thank you.
Next week on this podcast, Ken Vogel talks about his book, Devil's Advocates, the hidden story of Rudy Giuliani, Hunter Biden, and the Washington insiders on the payrolls of corrupt foreign interests.